Wuthering Heights is a novel written by Emily Brontë in 1847 which is considered a golden classic of modern literature. Surprisingly, this is the only novel of this British writer, but its mastery plot and innovative usage of numerous narrative lines won Mrs. Brontë eternal place in the ranks of best literature writers of all times. Against the wild stormy background of the northern English moors, the passion of Heathcliff and his love, Catherine Earnshaw, tears apart a family leaving death and destruction behind them. In her brooding novel, Emily Brontë paints a picture of two lovers whose attachment to each other is so strong that they cannot truly survive separation. The story is told mostly through the eyes of Nellie Dean, Catherine Earnshaw's former servant. She tells the story to Lockwood, who has rented Thrushcross Grange from his neighbour, Heathcliff, of Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights had once been owned by the Earnshaws and Catherine had been raised there. Her father had come home from a trip to Liverpool with a young orphan he had found. As Heathcliff joins the two Earnshaw children in their household, he is hated by the older Hindley but soon comes to love and be loved by the younger Catherine. Catherine is beautiful but headstrong, always determined to get what she wants. Heathcliff and Catherine become inseparable. As Hindley continues to treat Heathcliff cruelly, his father sends him away, allowing Heathcliff to remain at home. This furthers Hindley's hatred of Heathcliff, and upon his father's death Hindley returns home and Heathcliff finds himself a disliked servant rather than a family member, but he remains because of his love for Catherine. However, when Catherine is hurt and must spend 5 weeks at neighbouring Thrushcross Grange, then owned by the Lintons, she is entranced by their gracious lifestyle and becomes attracted to young Edgar Linton, damaging her relationship with Heathcliff. Hurt, Heathcliff leaves Wuthering Heights swearing to return someday, and Catherine marries Edgar Linton, despite knowing that she truly loves Heathcliff. 3 years pass and no one hears of Heathcliff until he returns one day, mysteriously wealthy and planning revenge. He spends time with Hindley, urging him to drink and gambling. His plan, which succeeds, is to get Hindley in debt to him, and when Hindley dies, Heathcliff becomes the owner of Wuthering Heights. Heathcliff begins to call on Catherine, who cannot deny her passion for him. Edgar becomes enraged, forcing Catherine to choose between him and Heathcliff. Catherine cannot choose and dies, giving birth to a daughter, Cathy. Heathcliff, blaming Linton for Catherine's death, takes revenge on him by wooing and marrying his sister, Isabella, whom he treats miserably till she runs away and later dies. He also takes revenge by abusing Hindley's son, Hareton, who is in his custody, and later also abusing his own son, Linton, by Isabella. Heathcliff also arranges for the marriage of Cathy Linton to his own son Linton. Soon after this Edgar dies and Linton dies. Now Cathy is basically a servant to the malevolent Heathcliff. However, while at Wuthering Heights, Cathy falls in love with the abused Hareton, and the book ends as Heathcliff becomes increasingly obsessed with the belief that Catherine's ghost is visiting him. Heathcliff chases her ghost onto the moors and soon dies. Catherine and Hareton marry, leaving Wuthering Heights for Thrushcross Grange, and supposedly the ghosts of Catherine and Heathcliff are still wandering the moors together. A meditation on the nature of love permeates the entirety of Wuthering Heights. Of course, the most important relationship is the one between Cathy and Heathcliff, which is all-consuming and brings Cathy to fully identify with Heathcliff, to the point that she says, "I am Heathcliff." Their love is everything but simple, though. They betray one another and themselves in order to marry a person for whom they feel a tamer, but convenient, kind of love. Interestingly, despite its intensity, the love between Cathy and Heathcliff is never consummated. Even when Heathcliff and Cathy are reunited in their afterlife, they do not rest peacefully. Instead, they haunt the moorland as ghosts. The love that develops between young Catherine and Hindley's son, Hareton, is a paler and gentler version of the love between Cathy and Heathcliff, and it's poised for a happy ending. It's tough to really call Wuthering Heights a romance, since the two lovers spend so much time making each other miserable. Still, we know Catherine and Heathcliff experience some sort of transcendent romantic and sexy connection, even though Catherine is so derisive of Heathcliff's social standing that early on in the story she questions his capacity to love at all. Heathcliff and Catherine's fanatical, impassioned affection connects to the nostalgia of their childhood and reaches beyond the grave into the afterlife, so there's definitely a love connection going on. All of the other examples of love, or, more precisely, marriage, are diminished in comparison, except perhaps that of Cathy Heathcliff and Hareton Earnshaw. Pitting nature against civilization, Emily Brontë promotes the romantic idea that the sublime, the awe-inspiring, almost frightening, beauty of nature, is superior to man-made culture. She makes this point by correlating many of the characters with one side or the other and then squaring them off against each other. For instance, Heathcliff, whose origins are unknown and who roams the moors, is definitely on the nature side, while his rival, the studious Edgar Linton, is in the civilized camp. Other pairings include Hareton Earnshaw versus Linton Earnshaw, Catherine versus Isabella, and Hareton versus Cathy. In all of these cases, Brontë makes one character a bit wild, perhaps by showing them in tune with animals and/or the outdoors and/or their emotions, while portraying the other as somewhat reserved and often prissy or fussy. But nothing is black and white in Wuthering Heights. Many of the characters exhibit traits from both sides. While Brontë argues that nature is somehow purer, she also lauds civilization, particularly in terms of education. Hareton Earnshaw personifies this combination of nature and civilization. Brontë associates the young orphan with nature. He is a coarse, awkward farm boy, as well as civilization. Inspired by his desire for young Cathy, he learns how to read. This mixture of down-to-earth passion and book-centered education make him, arguably, the most sympathetic character in the book. Revenge is a central focus of Heathcliff's life and, in fact, drives most of the decisions he makes later in the novel. Though Heathcliff gains some bitter satisfaction through causing pain for others, he does not achieve any personal happiness. Instead, his single-minded pursuit of revenge leaves him empty and exhausted. After being tormented by Hindley as a child, Heathcliff becomes obsessed with the idea of getting revenge. By taking advantage of Hindley's debt, Heathcliff gains control of Wuthering Heights and becomes the master of the house, a great irony considering he was once forced to work there as a de facto servant. Heathcliff seeks further revenge on Hindley by raising Hareton, who should have grown up to be a gentleman and a landowner, like a common servant, forcing on the boy the same indignity Hindley had once heaped on Heathcliff. Heathcliff is fully aware of his cruelty. As he explains to Nellie, he understands and desires Hareton's suffering. I know what he suffers now, for instance, exactly, it is merely a beginning of what he shall suffer, though. Moreover, Heathcliff has the perverse pleasure of knowing Hareton loves and respects him no matter how badly he treats him. Heathcliff eventually achieves his entire plan of revenge, including marrying Cathy and Linton so that he also gains control of the Grange. However, Heathcliff's death, alone and desperate for his lost love, represents the futility of his struggle. Though he achieved his desired revenge on those, living and dead, who had wronged him, he remains unfulfilled in his true desire, to be reunited with Cathy, which can only be achieved in death. Wuthering Heights is fully immersed in the class-related issues of the Victorian era, which were not just a matter of affluence. The characters show that birth, the source of income, and family connections played a relevant role in determining someone's place in society, and people usually accepted that place. Wuthering Heights portrays a class-structured society. The Lintons were part of the professional middle class, and the Earnshaws were a little below the Lintons. Nellie Dean was lower middle class, as she worked non-manual labor. Servants were superior to manual laborers. Heathcliff, an orphan, used to occupy the lowest rung in society in the Wuthering Heights universe, but when Mr. Earnshaw openly favored him, he went against societal norms. Class is also why Cathy decides to marry Edgar and not Heathcliff. When Heathcliff returns to the Heath a well-dressed, moneyed, and educated man, he still remains an outcast from society. Class also explains Heathcliff's attitude towards Hindley's son, Hareton. He debases Hareton the way Hindley had debased him, thereby enacting a reverse class-motivated revenge. Heathcliff hates as fiercely as he used to love Cathy, and most of his actions are motivated by a desire of vengeance. Throughout the novel, he resorts to exact some form of retribution from all those who, in his mind, had wronged him, Hindley, and his progeny, for mistreating him, and the Lintons, Edgar and Isabella, for taking Cathy away from him. Oddly, despite his all-consuming love for Cathy, he is not particularly nice towards her daughter, Catherine. Instead, while assuming the role of the stereotypical villain, he kidnaps her, forces her to marry his sickly son, and generally mistreats her. Wuthering Heights is not just an iconic novel, it is a novel that changed a traditional idea of romance. Years and years after its appearance, this story of stormy, prohibited, passionate and tragic love is still relevant and tempting to read. This book never gets old, just like true love can never get old.